The Democratic Alliance has laid criminal charges against the African National Congress for its role in the intricate large-scale corruption that involved specific individuals, government entities and private companies in what has now become known as the state capture. And findings of the Commission of Inquiry into allegations of state capture report has implicated some of the ANC's senior leaders, including former ANC and State President Jacob Zuma, the party's national chairperson Gwede Mantashe, NEC members Nomvula Mokonyane, who's also a former minister, former State Security Minister David Mahlobo, Deputy State Security Minister Zizi Kodwa, and some members of parliament such as Msebenzi, Zwane and Faith Muthambi, to mention but a few. Now, other than these individuals, the report also points to an ANC which was complacent in that it permitted and in some instances enabled corruption and state capture. Hennie van Vuuren is the director of Open Secrets and the author of several books, and he joins us now for a discussion on this. Hennie, good to have you on Morning Live. Welcome once more.
Good morning, Sakina. Yeah, good to be here.
So firstly, your reaction to the DA's move to lay criminal charges against the ANC for its role in state capture?
Yeah, Sakina, I think firstly we recognize the Zwane report lays out very clearly the Commission's findings suggest that there was a system of corruption in South Africa, that the leadership of the African National Congress was very much part of that system, and I think it doesn't mince any of its words by pointing out who is responsible, who should be investigated, and those, as I've said, many of those are leaders within the ANC. But we should remember, of course, that this is not the first time that the DA has done this. In 2019, the Democratic Alliance, under the leadership of their former leader, Muthambi, also went and laid similar charges against the ANC, and included, from what I recall, the charge of racketeering, so the suggestion that the ANC was acting as an organized criminal entity, if you like. It was set up only to extract money, and in this instance, extract money from the state, as we understand what racketeering means. And I guess one of the questions that I'm wondering about right now, Sakina, is that we need to recognize that there is definitely criminal culpability among some of the leadership of the African National Congress, without a doubt. Those individuals need to be investigated and they need to be prosecuted. But equally, one does wonder why the leadership, the current leadership of the Democratic Alliance, was not banging on the door of the National Director of Public Prosecutions, Advocate Shamila Batoy, and asking the questions why she was not following up on similar allegations that they had made and the charges that they had laid more than 3 years ago. So, I guess in sum, it is very important, I think, to focus on the responsibility of the ANC. It's also important for us to recognize that the DA, of course, is doing what political parties do, and they are preparing for an election that happens in 2 years' time. I think many of us want to see the system itself fixed. And for that to happen, you need to make the institutions work that actually hold these politicians and these corrupt politicians in particular to account.
So in holding them to account, the question arises of the individuals who are mentioned, and I suppose that then goes without say that there needs to be a follow-up. But how do you then separate the individual members of the party from the party itself?
Yeah, well, Sakina, I've been scratching my head to find examples where entire political parties have been charged with the crime of racketeering. I mean, we need to understand that these are complex beasts, and those are all the political parties, including the Democratic Alliance or the EFF. For that matter, if you're going to charge an entire party, you then need to go after most of its leadership, most certainly, and you need to suggest that that's filtered down into every corner of that party. And there is no doubt an extensive network of corruption that has touched people at a local, at a provincial, and at a national level in this country, and that the people we've elected, and those in our instance, most of them are members of the ANC, have certainly been central to that. But I think it's going to be difficult in a legal court process to be able to point towards the entire party being responsible in the manner in which the DA has set out. However, is there sufficient evidence to suggest that there are individuals who've been part of that process of corruption and state capture that we've seen Absolutely. We've as Open Secrets have been doing extensive work most recently on state-owned entities, including that of PRASA, the passenger rail agency. And Sakina, at the very moment that PRASA is at its knees, the country is buying these tall trains that don't fit onto the tracks. Commuters are waiting at the railway stations. South Africa spent about 3 billion rand on this so-called Swifambo contract that has led to very little other than corruption. And we know that a percentage, possibly as much as 100 million rand of that money went straight into the pocket of what are called ANC fundraisers. These are individuals who exist within the shadows. Importantly, Popo Molefe, who was the chairperson of PRASA and was a former senior ANC politician, he had been a premier, of course, in the Northwest, went to the top leadership, the top 6 of the ANC, and told President Zuma, then Deputy President of the ANC, Cyril Ramaphosa, Baleka Mbete, Gwede Mantashe, Jesse Duarte, amongst others, were all in the room, as well in Keys, and said to them, there's a problem at PRASA, there's wide-scale corruption, and the response from the top 6 leadership was to do absolutely nothing. Effectively, I think what's very important for us to recognize is that the leadership sided with the corrupt elements that were looting PRASA. They sided with the corrupt German-Spanish company Vosloo that was asset stripping PRASA at that time in their own interests, and they sided, in that sense, against the commuters who were left standing at the side of the railway line. So, I think those are important reasons why those type of individuals, and I'm going to stress the individuals here, need to be held to account. But it's a clear indication that rot is stretched right across the party, but certainly into the very top echelons of the leadership, both current and past.
And just staying with that for a little while longer, Hennie. So the former PRASA CEO, Lucky Montana, he told the commission that the CEOs of state-owned enterprises would routinely be summoned to Luthuli House for potential deals. He also goes on to say that in addition, you have issues from businessmen such as Edwin Sodi. Sodi alleged that he made payments of over 300,000 to ANC Treasurer General Paul Mashatile, over 6 million to former Health Minister Dr. Zweli Mkhize, 45,000 to Labour Minister Thulas Nxesi, and so on. Others were over 170,000 to Deputy Intelligence Minister Zizi Kodwa. And all of these things are mentioned. And you look at that, and this is just one businessman who had, tenders that were awarded to his company by members, or rather by government, should I say. So if that is just one person, we haven't even scratched the surface in terms of what could have happened. What does that tell us about that whole network, though?
Well, I think it tells us certainly that it lays bare the extent to which money has corrupted politics in our country. And Sakina, this certainly goes back, and it is, I think, what Chris Hani warned about in the 1990s before his assassination, was that money would fundamentally corrupt our democratic politics and the politics of the liberation movement. While we were celebrating the 80th birthday of former President Thabo Mbeki 2 weeks ago, we shouldn't forget it was under his administration that this process of Mendi Mzamang, who was the Treasurer General, there was a free-for-all in terms of accepting all kinds of dirty cash, including money from European arms dealers, it is alleged, and others, and that started to corrupt the very soul of the ANC. So it's a process that has I guess it's the tentacles have now run incredibly deep within the party, and you can see the resistance, and I'm using the issue of party funding here as an example, the resistance from some quarters within the ANC right now to stop any form of transparency which is required in terms of law. And of course, that's been the result of 20 years or more of activism from civil society to block transparency around these issues. We need to keep those spaces open, because the more we know, the more we can identify the individuals that are involved. We can show their links to shady business elites and groups, and certainly to corrupt corporations. And then the trick is keeping our pressure on the prosecuting authorities. Again, again, this evidence is sitting with the prosecuting authority. It should be with the Hawks, Sakina. And, we keep on making the point, as long as they fail to act in the interest of the South African people, they undermine our confidence in our democratic process, and they allow these corrupt politicians and corrupt business people to continue to repeat this harm and these human rights abuses against the South African people. And to that, they need to put an end.
So, and I'll come to accountability with regard to the NPA in just a moment, as we wrap this part of the party versus the individuals who are part of it. There has been comment, Hennie, that the state capture report basically stopped just short of recommending an investigation into the ANC itself. So an investigation against the ANC for its role in state capture. But why do you think the Commission in its report didn't make that sort of specific recommendation?
Well, I should say, Sakina, I think there are many people within the ANC's leadership who felt an extraordinary amount of heat over the last few years while Chief Justice Zondo and his team were doing their work. And they certainly felt that there was an investigation into the ANC. We recall the utterances of Deputy Secretary General of the ANC, Jesse Duarte, and others who were very critical of the Zondo Commission because they felt that it was digging too deeply into the inner workings and particularly the corrupt elements of the workings of the ANC, amongst others. So I think that the ANC has felt the heat. So firstly, I don't think they've kind of gotten away with it, or the argument has been made that, as you say, that the Zondo Commission stopped short of calling for an investigation. On the other hand, I think is in fact a good thing. We've had a 4-year investigation that's cost the public more than R1 billion. It's unearthed an enormous volume of evidence that could hold an entire swathe of the leadership of the ANC, but potentially, and it should, hold many of our corporate leaders to account as well. So I would argue that opening another investigation isn't helpful. In the same way that the Zondo Commission report, we've spoken a little bit about PRASA, the passenger rail agency. In fact, there's enormous volume of evidence about the corruption at PRASA. So this idea that the Zondo Commission put forward that there should be a further whole-scale investigation into it, we would argue, in fact, is not helpful at this stage. It's not going to stop the continuation of the problem that we see right now. So I'm doubtful that you need, a whole new an investigation into these kind of entities. The evidence is there. If we piece that together with material that the Zondo Commission may very well not have had either access to or have looked at, which is sitting with the various authorities at the moment, I think there are mountains of evidence to hold all manner of leaders within parties to account. And we know that, on this issue of accountability, Sakina, that it is going to be about holding those leaders to account in audit of government within political parties and companies.
Which brings us back then to the NPA, to the Hawks. So how do we hold these entities accountable?
Yeah, I think it's a fundamental question, Sakina, and I think it is a recognition of, in part, the extent to which the role of Parliament has been written off. And in a way, I think that the political parties are very much, and I really say the political parties across the board, and the big political parties, the ANC, the DA, the EFF, are all responsible for undermining Parliament in different ways. Whether it is just the out-and-out disruption of the work of Parliament, whether it is the continued focus only on very clear sort of political interest focused on particular individuals within political parties, as opposed to focusing on the systems that are broken. We need the parliamentary committees that are responsible for monitoring and ensuring that there is proper governance in our state-owned enterprises, but across government, to be holding those elected leaders to account. And I don't think we're seeing that. We're paying these politicians a huge amount of money at the moment. So we don't see that pressure on the one side. On the politicians, Sakina, I would argue. But certainly we don't see the correct kind of pressure from our elected leaders within Parliament on these agencies like the Hawks and the NPA. It's simply not good enough that people like Advocate Shamala Batoy or previously General Lebiya from the Hawks were allowed to arrive at Parliament as they do once a year with their annual reports. And all they keep on telling the parliamentarians is, we're going to catch the bad guys, so to speak, and the checkers in the mail. Next time it's going to be better. Well, in fact, they are failing the people at the moment. We are not seeing the kind of arrests and prosecutions that we're not seeing. I mean, as has been well recorded, the bungling on the side of the Ministry of Justice and the NPA in the arrests of the Guptas. We left it to the anti-democratic government of the United Arab Emirates to really lead that way. And we are fearful that we still haven't seen any image of the Guptas in prison to date. We don't know if they've had a bail hearing. And no one in the political parties is asking those hard questions. Why is the leader of the Economic Freedom Fighters and the Democratic Alliance in Parliament not saying to the head of the NPA, these are critical questions that we need answered from you now if we are going to try and fix our institutions and hold these type of people to account? And we simply don't see very much of that at all, Sakina. So, what I guess I'm saying is that we need to be putting pressure on the political parties instead of showmanship. It's very all good and well to go and walk to a magistrate's court or to a local police station and lay charges against individuals, but we need to see them using the powers that they have to extract information from the people that are employed by us to represent us in holding powerful people to account. And right now, again, to argue, I think we keep on making the point. It's not that we wish those institutions to fail, but they are failing us in doing the job that they're supposed to do. And they need to do far, far better, or we need new leadership in those institutions. And I think that's going to be a stark choice in the months ahead for people like the heads of the Hawks and the heads of the NPA.
And just finally, Hennie, with regard to the follow-through, we've spoken about the political party heads, the leaders and companies associated in the main with the African National Congress. But speaking of private sector actors in this particular report, they are still flying somewhat under the radar, aren't they?
Absolutely. And I think, Sakina, if we wanted to, if parties like the Democratic Alliance were interested in racketeering charges, then they would have included the role of the big corporations who are very much part of that system. Because you can't say here's a political party in the ANC, for example, on one side. It doesn't operate in a vacuum. It relied, the Guptas relied on our big banks, on FNB, on Standard Bank, to an extent on ABSA. It certainly relied on the big global banks like SABC and the Indian Bank, Bank of Baroda, who creamed off profit. And even when they closed off some of those bank accounts, like the Gupta bank accounts, it took them further years to close off any of the associated bank accounts owned by the Guptas. So they went for the headlines because they knew the public wanted that. And the public are, of course, many of us hold accounts at those banks. I'm talking about our local banks now, the Standard Banks and FNBs and others. But when that looting took place and that pillage by the Zuma family and the Guptas and their larger network at Estina and the dairy farm, it was the banks and the lawyers and the auditors who were quite central to that process that facilitated the movement of cash and the pillage of money from the South African people. So, I think what is crucial is that if what we don't hear are any of the voices in the political parties who are saying we need a whole-scale cleanup of the system. And that means that you are going to have to identify this as an ecosystem that developed that involved politicians, corrupt corporations, a whole range of middlemen and fixers in between, and that system will continue to replicate itself unless we try and, in a sense, take the whole thing down and scrub it clean. And I think the Zondo Commission has given us somewhat of a roadmap for this. If anything, the Zondo Commission has been much harder in many ways on the politicians than they've been on the corporations. There's very little push from the Zondo Commission to say that these corrupt corporations should in fact themselves be investigated. If anything, they are asked to assist authorities in nabbing the politicians. And we're saying that's not good enough. We need a systemic cleanup. And that means that if we talk about racketeering, we need to throw the CEOs of all those big corporations into the mix because they were part and parcel of this terrible system of state capture.
Hennie van Vuuren, always a pleasure speaking to you. Thanks so much for your time this morning. Director of Open Secrets, Hennie van Vuuren, discussing the viability of the DA case against the ANC as the party laid criminal charges for the ANC's role in state capture based on the findings of the Judicial Commission of Inquiry into allegations of state capture.